Hey there, some old guy in Wisconsin again. Today is the 18th of November. A lot of stuff going on, but I wanted to share some thoughts about an idea that I've been thinking about for a while. It's something I see an awful lot of debate and controversy going on. And I thought I would just go ahead and start with a statement. And that statement is that gender is a social construct. I know. There's tons of people out there who are arguing, for example, our administration, who seems to believe that they can dictate the policy of the belief of an entire country by executive order. And for the record, you cannot. They seem to believe that there's only two genders. I'm arguing that not only are there many, there are also, in one perspective, there aren't any. And I'm going to say that that is because gender is a social construct. Now, you might be thinking that I'm wrong, but let me make this argument. I'm going to prove it to you. You are going out to do some business. You're heading to an office building somewhere. You arrive at that building, you go in through the front door, and in the lobby you see the sign that says that the office you need is right down the hall to the right. So you head over to that door, and of course, it's a door that doesn't have a window. So as you're approaching it, you're about ready to touch that doorknob, and the knob turns and the door opens. Now, you almost get clobbered by the door. The person trying to exit the room looks up in surprise. Both of you are really surprised by this. And then the obligatory dance as the two people here are trying to navigate the same space at the same time. And eventually you do complete the dance. You move into the room, the other person leaves. Here you are inside the room, the door closes behind you, and you look up at the counter that's where you have to go to do the business that you came here to do. And standing behind that counter amongst the other employees who are looking bored or busy or whichever it is that they're doing, you see one guy standing there, and he's got a piece of paper in each hand and a confused look on his face. And he is looking from one piece of paper to the other, and he looks up and he sees you, and you're obviously not the person he's looking for because he scans the rest of the room and doesn't see who he's looking for. Comes back to you and he says, "Hey, did you just come in the door?" And you say, "Yes." "Did you pass anybody on your way in here?" You say, "Yes." The guy says, "Was it a man or a woman?" Everything that you will use to answer that question is a socially defined by society, by our culture, and taught behavior or characteristic. Everything. Now, some people will immediately argue that gender is defined by your genetics. Well, you can't tell what anybody's genetics are just by looking at them. You can't do it. The person that you passed in the doorway, you didn't do some kind of a DNA test on him or her in the way that they were moving through. Some people would argue that it depends on the genitalia you have between your legs. Well, trust me, you weren't looking at that either. Even if you were looking in the direction, you couldn't tell what was in there. So what do you have left? Well, maybe you have the kind of clothes that they were wearing. After all, in our culture, if someone is wearing a skirt, more than likely that's going to be someone we would describe as female. Maybe it's the shoes they're wearing. Maybe it's the hair length or the hairstyle, the presence of certain kinds of jewelry, the presence of makeup, its styling, if there is any to be seen. Perhaps it's the style of clothing that they're wearing. Maybe it's whether or not they have facial hair. Perhaps it's whether or not you can see obvious contours of, say, breast development or a flared hip. The problem is that all of those characteristics are not necessarily constrained to one gender. They might signal a certain thing, but they're not constrained to it. But what does that signal? Where did that derive from? Where does that come from? You see somebody with really long hair and it's styled a certain way and you think, "Oh, well, that woman looks nice." You've decided that that is an individual with a gender that you're going to call female. But why? You were told to expect a certain kind of hairstyle. Those kinds of hairstyles are usually things that are associated with women. Certain kinds of facial hair or the absence of it will tell you whether this is sometimes whether a male or a female. But, guys don't have to have facial hair. And some women do, whether that's something that's common or not. The presence of breasts, let me tell you, there are plenty of men that I've seen that are carrying more than sufficient amounts of extra weight that what's going on their chest could easily pass for mammary glands. So everything that you would use to answer that question is a characteristic or a behavior that you were told is associated with one gender or another. And the individual who's exhibiting those traits was taught to do that. You got taught to run a certain way based on whether you're a boy or a girl. You got taught to talk a certain way. You certainly got taught to wear your hair a certain way, your clothes a certain way, everything. Everything that you use to determine whether or not the person you pass in the doorway is a man or a woman is based entirely on what you were taught to expect. Socially derived, socially taught, and socially enforced. How many of us have stories of being shamed for not adhering to the stack of societal definitions that we are supposed to adhere to? So the next time that you're sitting here thinking, well, there's only two genders and it's obvious, it's either man or woman and that's it, and it all depends on your genetics. No, it doesn't. Just keep in mind that the reason that you believe that there are two is because you were taught there were only two. Doesn't make it right. Doesn't mean that it's true. Open your mind a little bit. Consider the possibility that it isn't a binary thing, but an entire field of it. Talk to you later.